Good evening. It is good to see each and every one of you. I hope you've had a good afternoon. Hope you've had a good Lord's Day thus far. Um, Denver Chiefs, anyone in the Super Bowl, so we have plenty of time tonight, right? Uh, the lesson tonight is going to be coming from the book Song of Solomon. If you know much about Song of Solomon, you know probably hear the idea of a lesson from that book. So probably the first thing we think of is, ooh, really? Because it's pretty vivid about a relationship between a man and his wife, and a husband and a woman and her husband. But I will tell you, this will be very G-rated. I think it is in the Bible. It just gives some language that we're not really used to reading about in the Bible. And when I first came up with this lesson, this is not one that's new. I did it years ago. I simply entitled it, "You Light Up My Life," and I did it around the same time of year, I think, as well. And in a couple of weeks ago, we did a devotional that was kind of 80s-ish, right? If you remember, it was, what was that now? I had it in my head a minute ago. Give me something to believe in, right? That was it. I'll get there. And so I thought, well, what title can I come up with this that hinders around, that kind of goes with an 80s theme? And I shared this with a few others, so they'll maybe still think it's comical, but I settled on the idea of simply looking at the idea of endless love, right? And no, I don't listen to that song. Only time I can think of that song is when I watch Happy Gilmore, honestly, because that one scene. But though the title is a little bit silly, the lesson, no doubt, is one that we should be mindful of, because there are some lessons we can learn from the book of Song of Solomon. It is not a book that you commonly hear lessons from because of the nature and material that's there, but so we're not going to be doing an in-depth study of the entire book, obviously, this evening. We have one lesson that I do, and it's really this one. The Song of Solomon reveals what faithful, God-honoring love between husband and wife looks like, and why that love strengthens the home, blesses others, and why it also endures hardship. Have you ever heard someone, I've heard it before in marriage seminars and sermons. I've heard preachers get up and different individuals, and they'll talk about marriage, and sometimes, not everybody, but sometimes they kind of give the idea as if they have a perfect marriage and that there's never an argument ever had. I beg to differ. Sorry. Maybe our definition of argument is different. We all have disagreements. We all have maybe some heated discussions. There is no such thing as a marriage bond, in my opinion, that does not go through some type of hardship, some type of difficulty. The Song of Solomon is known for its intimate portrayal of marriage, focusing on love, affection, and commitment between husband and wife. While the book contains many lessons, one central truth, I believe, stands out: that faithful marital love has the power to be one that endures a long time, that endures till the end. And it will be one that also withstands life's hardship. And we might say life's hardships, right? As you look at Song of Solomon, we're not going to read all the verses that I'm going to mention. We're going to read just a few of them, but not all of them. As you think about the idea of endless love, I think about the mutual affection between the husband and his wife, and vice versa, between the wife and her husband, right? If you look at Song of Solomon chapter 1, I've entitled this, this first point here, keeping a little bit with the idea of "You Light Up My Life," but the bride's love for the groom. And we have there, and we're going to be skipping all over the book of Song of Solomon on purpose, because we're going to hit some highlights and bring home one, I think, central lesson. If you look at Song of Solomon chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, we find, I'm not going to read all this, but if you look at verse 2, he says, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. Your love is better than wine," as the New King James words it there. The idea there is that she openly values the affection from her husband, right? And he goes on to talk about how because of the fragrance of your ointments and all those kinds of things, fragrance of your ointments poured forth, therefore the virgins love you, draw me away. And he goes on in verse 5 through 7, the same idea, right? She talks about how she is dark, not the idea as we find later is actually because she's out in the sun. It wouldn't matter either way. But he says in verse 5, she says, I am dark but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not look upon me because I am dark, because the sun has tanned me. My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but my own vineyard I have not kept. We find there simply the idea, I think about it this way, that she has been put in charge of things to such a degree that she hasn't been able to pursue her own happiness, pursue her own husband. That's what I think about there when I read those verses. She openly, though, values the affection of her husband, and above, we might say, above material pleasure. She says there in verse 2 there that his love is better than wine, verses 2 and 3. She desires his presence and closeness, seeking time with him as well. If we look at chapter 2, Song of Solomon chapter 2, and looking there in verse 16, you probably have heard this, at least part of this, many times, right? My beloved is mine and I am his. You probably have heard that phrase a lot, right? But he goes on to say he feeds his flock among the lilies. We find there in verse 16 that she values her time with him. As that phrase, my beloved is mine and I am his, right? The idea they belong to one another. They enjoy spending time with one another. We as husbands and wives should enjoy spending time with one another, right? I enjoy spending time with my wife. I believe she enjoys spending time with me, unless I'm misbehaving. But we enjoy spending time with one another, right? We joke around a lot. We laugh a lot, all kinds of different things. We do silly things together. And we enjoy one another's time together. If you look there in Song of Solomon there in verse 16, when she says, my beloved is mine and I am his, that shows a special kind of affection, doesn't it? We don't say that about just anybody. We say that about those who we love very deeply. We say that about our spouses, right? The groom's love for the bride is mentioned also if you go back to chapter 1, Song of Solomon chapter 1, verses 8 through 11. He says there, if you do not know, O fairest among women, that's how he refers to her, fairest among women. Now I will say there are some phrases in here you could use on your wives, to say use on your wives. You could speak to your wives, but there's some I wouldn't use. I don't know if I just tell my wife that her neck is like a tower of ivory, but other things are no doubt some that might be pretty nice, right? Some sound a little bit odd to us because in 2026 we don't say those kinds of things, right? I've never heard that phrase used in the pickup line, but anyway. But in verse 8 says here, follow in the footsteps of the flock and feed your little goats beside the sheep herds and tents. I have compared you, my love, to my filly among Pharaoh's chariots. There's an example. We don't say those kinds of things. But we might say, you're better than anyone I've ever met, right? That's a similar idea, isn't it? Look at verse 10. He says, your cheeks are lovely with ornaments, your neck with chains of gold. We will make you ornaments of gold with studs of silver. He's talking about here the beauty and how precious she is to him, right? He says that she is the fairest and the most precious there in verse 8, and then also there in verse 15. And in verses 9 through 11, he's really describing here beauty as something that is rare and valuable, right? He calls her rare. That's not a bad thing to say to those we care about. Because finding, hopefully, a Christian mate who loves the Lord as much as you do, though we have a room that's filled with many this evening, it's still rare, isn't it? We look around the world today, when we think about our own relationship with our wife, or maybe with your husband, and how rare it is to have that type of relationship because it's not common. As you think about this idea of how the bride expresses her love for the groom expresses his love for the bride, love is not silent, is it? Notice they speak these things as if they're speaking to one another, right? I remember years ago I was talking to some guy who was quite a bit older than me, and he was talking about relationship with his wife. I really don't know why or even how it came up, and he was telling me about some things, and I said I don't profess to be an expert in the marriage bond or being the perfect husband or anything like that. But I simply asked, when's the last time you told your wife you loved her? When you're not walking at the door to work. I don't know. Well, you might want to think about that, right? Because sometimes today, that's not happening a whole lot, is it? Sometimes it's something we say, and it's just something that we say, right? I remember I was watching a television show, and the husband told his wife, he said, I told you on your wedding day that I loved you. If something changes, I'll let you know. Funny, but not a good idea, right? Not a good idea. Love is not silent. It is expressed, it is affirmed, and it is reinforced through words and through actions, right? Actions speak louder than words, we say many times. Sometimes it's hard for us to express that. We're talking about a wife to her husband or a husband to his wife. Some of us have a hard time expressing that. We should do our very best to make it known, though, right? Endless love for each other. The visible effect of a loving marriage is what I think about here. If we go back to Song of Solomon chapter 1, looking at the 4th verse, the latter part of verse 4, says there, we will be glad and rejoice in you. We remember your love more than wine. Rightly do they love you. As you look here, the latter part of verse 4. Those around them see and rejoice in their relationship. They see the love that they have for each other, right? They see how they talk to one another. They see how they interact with one another. Sometimes we joke around with one another as husbands and wives, and sometimes people think, are they very happy? Sometimes that's how we express ourselves to one another, right? We tease one another. Lovingly, I hope, we tease one another, right? You all probably have heard the phrase, well, if I didn't like you, I wouldn't tease you. I heard that when I was in preaching school. I said, well, I must be liked everywhere I go, as I get teased everywhere I go. But that's how sometimes we communicate our love for one another. But others should see the love that we have for one another. Their love is rooted not in appearance, but also in character and in devotion. He says there in verse 4, we have there those words rather, we will remember your love more than wine. We will remember your love. That's not a physical thing. Love is not something that you hand to someone and say, here's my love, right? You express it through words and through actions. And we find there in verse 4, they say, we will remember your love more than wine. Discord and drama are not allowed to rule the relationship. No doubt, there's always going to be times that come up that we're going to have difficulties for one reason or for another. We look at Song of Solomon chapter 3, looking at verses 1 through 4. He says, we have there these words, by night on my bed I sought the one I love. This seems to be the wife talking to her husband. I sought him, but I did not find him. I will rise now, I said, and go about the city. In the streets and in the squares, I'll seek the one I love. I sought him, but I did not find him. The watchman who go about the city found me and said, have you seen the one I love? Scarcely had I passed by them when I found the one I love. I held him and would not let him go until I brought him to the house of my mother and into the chamber of her who conceived me. What happens? She goes out looking for a husband. Interestingly, she brings him home to her mother's house, right? Probably the idea of cultural thing there, but what is happening? She's not allowing whatever disagreement, if there was one, to separate them, right? There's so many times throughout our lives we have differences, at least of opinion. But friends, we can't allow arguments or disagreements to go on forever, can we? In fact, it's Proverbs that tells us, I believe it's Proverbs and also there in Ephesians, if I'm not mistaken, that Paul tells us, not let the sun go down on your wrath, right? It tells us that whatever disagreement, whatever thing you've had, needs to have a definite end. Work it out, whatever that may require. But a long-held pain or disagreement is never good, is it? The longer things fester, the worse things get, don't they? That's why we cannot allow the sun to go down on bad times. Conflict is addressed quickly and intentionally, not avoided or prolonged. Not avoided or prolonged. It means we don't stretch things out longer than they have to last because he wants to argue forever. You may like arguing. I don't. We want to do what? We want to solve whatever those issues are and move on. We cannot avoid difficulties. We have to address them. We have to do that with the idea, though, as the Bible tells us, with love in our hearts. You know, I've seen on movies and televisions where individuals almost take pleasure in, quote, winning an argument. Is there really such thing as winning an argument? No. It's really just ending one, isn't it? There's really no winners in an argument. Healthy marriages do not avoid conflict, and they also refuse to let conflict linger. We deal with it, and we what? We solve it, we deal with it, whatever we have to do. We don't allow those things to extend for long periods of time. I told Darren this wouldn't be a long lesson. I wasn't lying. Some lessons for us today. Enduring truths from the Song of Solomon is what I think about here. If you look at Song of Solomon chapter 8. Chapter 8. You look there at verses 6 and 7. It says, "Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is as strong as death, jealousy as cruel as the grave. Its flames are flames of fire, a most vehement flame. Many waters cannot quench love, nor can the floods drown it. If a man would give for love all the wealth of his house, it would be utterly despised." We might think, what is he talking about? If we look at verse 6, true love is sealed, that is publicly acknowledged and faithfully guarded. We acknowledge one another, right? I remember one time this has been years ago, but I was at the gym I was on elliptical or something, and I wasn't paying any attention. I had my phone there watching some documentary or something, and I had no idea who was coming up. And some lady came up and said something to me. What she said was she saw my progress or whatever, but that doesn't matter. But she came up to me, and I literally almost fell off the elliptical because she scared me to death. I didn't know she was there. I freaked out a little bit because some lady was talking to me, and I said something like, "Uh-huh," and she walked away. But it was uncomfortable to me. And it should be, shouldn't it? Some strange person comes up to you. Now, she was being innocent, but not everybody's innocent, are they? It should be strange when someone of the opposite sex approaches us. It should be something that we don't go along for. I'm not saying every person who talks to you of the opposite sex is being a creep. It has impure intentions. But we always have to be those who make sure that there's no doubt who we belong to, right? I remember years ago, I was reading a book by an individual. He's not always right on a lot of things, but he was on this. But he had a similar situation, and he said, I just started using the phrase my wife, over and over again, and rightfully so. And what's interesting is many times we probably do the same thing without even realizing it, right? Someone talk to me, and I'll mention my child, or I'll mention my wife, and if anyone has impure intentions, what's going to happen? They're going to go somewhere else, hopefully, right? But the idea here in verse 6, he said, the idea that true love is sealed. It says, let me back up here. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is as strong as death. It is guarded, right? Separation only through death. And it's painful because love is strong and because love is binding. Now, we're not talking about a love that's, sometimes we call it teenager love, no offense. But that's what we call it sometimes, right? Sometimes we used to use the phrase puppy dog love, whatever. But love here is not the idea of just the affection we have for someone, but it's the marital bond of love, right? A love that doesn't sway because of one bad day or even a bad year. You ever have a year you feel like, man, you had so many things that went wrong and different issues come up, and you think, I can't wait for this year to get over. Maybe we can just reset for the next one because bad things happened, right? But separation, as you find in verse 6, death is painful because love is strong and because love is binding. If you look at verse 6 again, it says there, its flames are flames of fire, and most vehement heat. And it goes on to say in verse 7, many waters cannot quench love. Hardships, or many waters, as I think it's being referenced there as hardships, cannot extinguish a true love between a man and a woman, between a husband and his wife. It cannot be put out, right? You know, it's very sad today that, I don't know what the percentage is now of a divorce, but it's always very sad, isn't it? Anytime a marriage ends in divorce, it's never a good thing. There's always pain there. There's always hurt. And sometimes, sadly, it's something that, whether we like it or not, sometimes it cannot be avoided because of one reason or another, or because the other person, maybe. But we know the Bible tells us that's never what God intended. Mankind has a good has a good record of messing up things and doing things that God never intended us to do. Right? Malachi tells us that God hates divorce, right? Because why? Because sin's always involved. It doesn't matter who did what. There's sin's always involved, right? We look there in Solomon chapter 8, verses 6 and 7. He says, many waters cannot quench love, nor can the floods drown it. The idea there is constantly pushing through whatever difficulty comes our way. Love within marriage is powerful and it is sacred. It endures hardship and it cannot be purchased. You look at the latter part of verse 7. It says, if a man would give for love all the wealth of his house, it would be utterly despised. Never try to impress someone with money or material things. If they are impressed by it, that's probably not a good sign. Move on. There was a time years ago, obviously, before I ever met Lisa, I was dating a young lady who was of that sort. She was impressed by things that you buy. Well, that didn't last very long, and for good reason. But a relationship like that is never going to last very long, is it? Because it's not based on anything that's real. When it's based on material things, physical things, it's always going to fall apart. Love is priceless. It cannot be bought, traded, or replaced. You know, even someone loses their spouse, they still have love for that person, don't they? I remember the first time I met Avis and Kay Watson. Some of you may know them from 39th Street. Wonderful people. And I was over at their house, and they brought us in, and I saw pictures of their previous spouse that they had passed away. And I thought, that is something. Because they weren't ashamed of who they were bound to before, right? Obviously, death had loosed them from that. But they still had pictures of their spouse previous. It's a strong kind of love, isn't it? It was interesting that Avis and Kay, that one did not require the other to stop thinking about the other previous spouse. Instead, they recognized that and they were honest about it. And I think about that often because that was quite a display of love for each other to allow those kinds of things in the home as well. Love must be protected, it must be nurtured, and elevated above life's floods and above life's distractions, right? Like I said before, there are going to be days, maybe weeks, where we're having difficulties that we're having to deal with, and it causes strain on our relationship. We can't give up. You know, if you want to give up, I think in many ways, Satan wins. Because if a Christian gives up in his relationship, if he or she gives up in their relationship to God, Satan wins. But I think the same can be said if we give up in our relationship between our husband and our spouse, Satan wins. And that's not what he wants. Sometimes, like I said before, it cannot be avoided. But sometimes it can be. Some things for us to think about as we get ready to close this evening. I have 3 points I want you to remember that are not going to be on the screen. I don't remember if they're in a handout or not, so if they're not, you can get on to me later about it. But points to remember. Love thrives when it is expressed and not assumed. Love thrives when it is expressed and not assumed. What I mean is tell people you care about them. Tell them you love them. Say it with words, say it with actions. Sometimes we're not very good at it. There's nothing wrong with working on it, right? Secondly, marriage is strengthened when both husband and wife honor God's design. What does that mean? Who is the head of the house? The man is. And I've said many times before, he may not be the brightest bulb in the box, but he's still the head of the home. That's the bottom line. Not because I say so, because that's what God said. We honor that design in the home. A faithful marriage reflects the steadfast love that God desires from his people. A faithful marriage reflects the steadfast love that God desires from his people. We love one another. Steadfast means it endures. We keep pushing through. There may be a time when mistakes are made at various levels of severity. We can still push through. Forgiveness is available to everybody. From God it's available, but it also should be available to our husbands and to our wives, shouldn't it? People make mistakes. Sometimes we do things, say things, whatever it may be, the various ways in which we could hurt somebody. But repentance and forgiveness should always be available to everyone. The Song of Solomon presents marriage as a blessing and not as a burden. It is a blessing, isn't it? It should be a blessing to come home to our spouse and see them there waiting for us. It should be a blessing to know they are there for us. When love is nurtured and protected, it brings peace, stability, and joy. When love is nurtured and protected, it brings peace, stability, and joy. I think about it this way. When love is protected, there's no drama. Anybody here like drama in their lives? It's really annoying, I think. In various reasons you come up, it gets annoying, right? A car could break down, and to some degree it's going to cause drama in your lives because it does what? It causes you to deviate from what you normally would do, right? It causes some level of drama. Ask JJ. He's dealing with that right now, right? Tearing stuff apart. Fun times, not really. But they can cause periods of drama and annoyance. But when love is nurtured, it protects from those sorts of things. It brings peace. It brings stability. And it brings joy. Just as husbands and wives are to remain devoted to one another, God's people must remain devoted to him, refusing to let hardship or discord weaken our faith. Just like we don't allow anything to weaken our love between our husband and wife relationship, we don't want anything to weaken our relationship between us and God either. And think about it this way. If our relationship with God ever weakens, you think that affects our marital relationship? I think absolutely. If one becomes weak, becomes tired in the faith, it affects everybody in that house, including the spouse. That's why it's so important we don't allow ourselves to get tired and weak and grow weary. That we encourage one another. Our greatest encourager in the faith should be our spouse, shouldn't it? If one of us says, I'm tired, I don't know if I can go today, the other one says, get up, stop being a baby, right? Maybe not literally, but sometimes we have to do that, don't we? Sometimes we listen, sometimes we don't. But we have to be those who should be the biggest encourager of our spouse. God's people must remain devoted to each other. That's the bottom line, isn't it? You look through Song of Solomon, look through all those phrases, look through all the things it says. One common thread is found throughout it. The love between a man and his wife, and the love between a woman and her husband. And it's not one, as it points out there in chapter 8, that can be bought. It's not one that can be drowned out by hardships, but it's one that endures a lifetime. And that way it is endless, isn't it? Until our dying days. This evening, as you think about these things, I know this may not be a lesson that is one that might cause someone to obey the gospel. But friends, we need to do so. We'll be glad to assist you this evening. If you have things you need to ask for prayers for or concerns about in your own lives, we'll be glad to assist you in that as well. It's going to be singing the song that's been selected.